Good morning. Welcome to Hope, Faith, and Joy Daily Devotion with me, Pastor Amanda. We are looking at Genesis chapter 9 today. So we've had the big flood and they are coming off the ark. Yesterday we learned that Noah built an altar to give thanks to God. And today we then find that God then has a covenant with Noah. And the first thing that God says to Noah after the words of praise and thanksgiving that were given to God, he says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So there's that remembrance of what Adam and Eve were asked to do. This was their kind of blessing that they were given. But what we find out in today's chapter is that the balance of creation is not the same as it was in the Garden of Eden. Now, it is okay for Noah and his family and everyone else to actually eat animals and birds. Like they are now given permission to eat of them, and in a sense, it's a sense of murder the animals, but they are given to them as food from now on. So the balance of Eden has been disrupted, and so the only thing is that God says about this new life together is you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. So there's this sense in which they cannot, have the blood of the animals, but they can have the meat. And there's this also a reminder to them that it's because human life also has blood in it, so there's a sacredness to it. And there's something that it's where all of life happens, is in the blood, is how it was understood. And so then God goes on to say, whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human, shall that person's blood be shed. So there's this sense of justice that must be lived into. Though God is the ultimate judge, but there is this awareness that life is so sacred, and we'll see how that starts to play out later, though. I mean, this is kind of like the beginning, but we recognize that there's, when we get into Deuteronomy and Leviticus, how some of these rules or guidelines are changed and adapted as they mature and move forward. But we can see right here, this is what says, and the reason for this is because we're in God's image. I think that's important to notice. The reason there's this harshness in what happens is because we're in a sense hurting God. Murder hurts God. And we need to take that seriously. And I think it's important for us to then even tone it down just a little bit. But what other things hurt God? When we are unforgiving, when we're merciless, when we hold grudges. So it doesn't have to be as grand as murder. But there's a lot of ways in which we hurt God in different ways. And so we should be aware of that. But as we find out, is this covenant is not just with Noah. It is then passed down to the rest of humanity. And there is this promise that the world will never be destroyed by floods again. All of humanity will not be destroyed by water. And for a covenant, it's important that a covenant be signed by those who are in it. But what we find out is that there's not really a signing by Noah, but there is a signature of God. And the signature is this bow in the sky. And we have called that a rainbow. And what's really interesting is that's God's signature to this covenant. And it's because it says here that the bow will remind God of God's promise. So the signature is God's signature to the covenant. It's not Noah's. It's not our signature. Humanity did not actually sign this particular covenant. Now we're going to find out when Abraham has a covenant, he's going to have his own signature, so to speak. But this covenant with Noah has God's signature on it, which is the rainbow in the sky. And so that's a kind of an interesting twist as we move forward in our Bible and see how covenants are worked out in the future. But this is the one that God signs, and he signs it with the rainbow in the sky. So we're always reminded of God's promise to us, and God is reminded of God's promise to us. Kind of cool if you think about it. Well, then we have this interesting interlude with Noah and his sons, starting in verse 18 to the end. And it kind of is there to help us understand why there's these issues with the Canaanites. When we start reading into Moses and everything, we're going to find out that the Canaanites are looked down upon very strongly. And we see this based on Noah's story, how this all happened. So it just, we find out, you know what, humans, the way they are, it doesn't take Noah long to figure out how it says in verse 20, he is a man of the soil, and the first plant he planted was a vineyard. And in verse 21, we find out Noah, he drank some of the wine and became drunk. And we find that he laid himself out uncovered in his tent. And we find out that one of his sons, Ham, goes in and sees his father naked. And what happens is, instead of just like turning around and like doing nothing, he goes and he tells his brothers. And so what happens is their brothers, out of respect of their father, it says that they took a garment, put it on their shoulders, walked in the tent backwards, threw it on their dad to cover him up, and then walked out. And it's what we find is that Ham, his sin, so to speak, was that he disrespected his father. He did not honor his father. He saw what had happened, and then he kind of like went and told his friends, his brothers. And so we find that there's a disrespect that is taken very strongly. And what happens is Ham is the father of Canaan. And when Noah wakes up and finds out what happens, he curses Canaan. So he curses the son of Ham. He doesn't curse Ham. He curses the son of Ham, who is Canaan, who will then be the father, of course, all the Canaanites. And he says that the lowest of slaves shall be to his brothers. So then now it's kind of putting this hierarchy among the nations that will come out of these brothers and their sons and their grandsons and so forth. And we find that Shem is given the highest mark, and so because he's the eldest son, Ham is then placed at the bottom, and then Japheth, the third son, is then given like the second position. And so there's this reordering of what the benefits and blessings. And I think that's important for us to notice time and time again, is that what we're seeing here is integrity and character can shift our place in the order. Now, other societies, that wouldn't happen. The order is this. It's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so no matter what, it has to be, like, this is the way the blessings go. But what we find time and time again within our scriptures is that character and integrity can change the order of things. It's not in stone. Like, my favorite thing is when there's some daughters that finally say, no, it's our claim, and they get it. Like, that's something really, this is novel. This is crazy at that time. That's not what happened. And I think it's important for us to see this today, is that it's not about a hierarchy. It's not always about the rules. It's about integrity and character that can shift the whole dynamics within a family, which then the dynamics of a community and the country and the world. And we have that power by our character, by our integrity, of how we go out into a world that might be throwing hate out right now. We're putting love out there. We're just showing ourselves to be those people who spread love everywhere. And we can shift the order of things through that. So I find that this chapter can bring us a lot of hope and everything. So thanks for joining me today with Hope, Faith, and Joy Daily Devotion. I hope you got something out of this today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we look at chapter 10 of Genesis. Have a fantastic day.